going to outline what the Collaborative Area Management Project actually is and what some of our objectives are, why the project has come about and some background information on how it all started, how we know what impact it's having on the landscape, and some of the technologies that are being used to maximise the outcomes of this project. So what is collaborative area management? It's the management of a group of properties that is undertaken collaboratively by a group of land managers. This is a project where land managers in southwest Queensland are coming together in groups to construct and maintain a predator exclusion fence which surrounds their respective cluster of properties. This group then focus collaboratively on the shared problems that they have inside the fence. This project was a South West NRM initiative that was further funded by the Queensland Government to support the grazing industry and primarily sheep and wool production in the area. The need for these exclusion fences has come about for a number of reasons, but is largely due to predation on livestock by wild dogs and feral pigs, and also uncontrolled grazing pressure, which comes from native herbivores such as kangaroos and feral pests including goats. A number of individual land managers in the southwest region have constructed these exclusion fences on their individual properties. However, not all land managers in the area are in a position to supply the upfront capital for such a venture. So the Collaborative Area Management Project was designed to increase the area enclosed by an exclusion fence while keeping costs as low as possible. The payback period for individual landholders who have fenced is reported to be as low as 2 years. Okay, so some of the main objectives of this collaborative area management are to control total grazing pressure across parts of southwest Queensland. This will then allow land managers to conduct rotational grazing and paddock spelling, which should then demonstrate a substantial increase in ground cover condition. It aims to reduce predation and in turn allow graziers to continue with or return to sheep grazing if desired. To enhance socio-economic function of rural townships through increased labour, tourism, education and health. This is because the sheep industry employs a higher number of people than the cattle grazing industry, bringing more people to rural towns. And finally, to demonstrate that the efforts to eradicate pest animals such as dogs, cats, pigs and foxes, and weed plant species, especially those of national significance, are more efficient and cost effective through collaborative efforts. So there are currently 7 clusters in southwest Queensland that range in size from roughly 140 to 380,000 hectares. This then covers a total area of about 1,650,000 hectares, and this map will give you a rough idea of the scale of the project for the state as a whole. These clusters involve fencing lengths of roughly 200 to 400 kilometres per group, and generally land managers are finding that they can construct about 1 kilometre of fence per person per day, and a whole cluster is taking roughly 12 months to complete. The smallest number of land managers that we've got in one of these groups is only 3, while other groups between 10 to 20, and the largest group that we've got, this one here, has 40 properties in it, so they're big areas. Next slide. The design of the fence is a netting style. It stands about 1.5 metres in height, and it has a barbed wire at the top and a 30 centimetre apron that flicks out at the bottom to prevent animals from digging underneath. Each cluster does have a slightly different fence because there are a number of different suppliers, but they all follow this general style. There is evidence of animals attempting to dig under the fence, however the apron seems to be sufficient in keeping them out. So why do we need collaborative area management? Firstly, predation. So historically this area, and specifically the Mulga Lands bioregion, have been identified as one of the leading sheep and wool production areas in the state. Today, however, much of this area has had to shift from sheep industry into cattle grazing as a means of sustaining an agricultural industry. One driver of this change is predation on livestock, specifically by wild dogs, but also feral pigs, who also contribute largely to habitat degradation and disease transmission. Predation is a major problem not only for sheep graziers but also for cattle graziers. In Queensland for 2008-2009 alone, the major economic costs associated with wild dogs and the grazing industry added up to over $67 million. This includes costs associated with disease spread, maintenance of the wild dog barrier fence and livestock losses. Wild dogs are a declared pest and they have been regulated under Queensland legislation since 1885. They prey not only on livestock but also on small native animals. The techniques that are currently being used to control wild dog populations are baiting, trapping, shooting and exclusion fencing. While all these techniques have advantages and disadvantages, it is ideal for exclusion fencing to be used in conjunction with the other techniques, not only to remove wild dogs from an area, but also to prevent reinfestation. So collaborative area management also aims to reduce total grazing pressure. Unmanaged grazing pressure affects the agricultural industry through impacts on ground cover, soil erosion, weed invasion and fouled water supplies. This in turn can also have a negative impact on native animals that rely on the ground cover as refuge from predation and may ultimately have an impact on the biodiversity values in an area. Total grazing pressure is contributed to by both domestic and wild stock, which includes macropods and feral species such as goats and pigs. The level of grazing pressure applied by non-domestic animals can increase grazing intensity by at least 50% in some areas. These species, along with predators such as wild dogs, are able to maintain high numbers across pastoral lands where they have access to artificial water points. Exclusion fencing will assist in reducing total grazing pressure by limiting access to pasture by wild stock, and it will allow land managers the opportunity to conduct pasture management activities, which include rotational grazing and paddock spelling to prevent overgrazing. So the Collaborative Area Management Project started in 2013 with two cluster groups receiving funding from Southwest NRM. These two groups form the starting point of this pilot project, which then received further funding from the Queensland State Government to fund another 5 clusters. To implement this program, Southwest NRM requested expressions of interest from groups of land managers in the region who were looking for an innovative solution to tackle predation and grazing pressure issues. These expressions of interest were then assessed by a panel comprised of Southwest NRM board and staff members who decided which groups were to be given a priority for funding. Applications were assessed for a range of factors, including environmental benefit, economic return, the history of collaboration between the landholders, and the size, shape and location of the cluster. Each of the existing clusters are loosely based around original groups such as baiting syndicates, social circles or firefighting units. The successful groups of land managers then formed incorporated associations. By forming these recognised associations, the groups have been able to use their collective buying power to purchase fencing materials at a reduced cost. Some groups have opted to build internal fences, breaking these larger groups into smaller management units, and they've been able to secure further fencing materials at the same reduced cost. Land managers within each group have then worked together to construct their fence. This saves time when done together, rather than individual land managers having to do it alone. The land managers in each group share the fencing equipment around the cluster, which has further reduced the costs associated with constructing infrastructure on such a large scale. According to the groups who have completed construction of the fence, the building is the easy bit. These groups are now working together to mitigate the issues that they all share in the group. Coordinated baiting programs are being used to target wild dogs, pigs and foxes, and land managers are applying for damage mitigation permits to assist with controlling the kangaroo numbers. These groups can apply for further funding as a single management entity, and issues such as weed species have become a problem that several properties are tackling at once. There are also positive social outcomes for working together as a group, as land managers who haven't spoken to neighbours for years are helping each other. Getting a large group of land managers of different ages, backgrounds and experience to work together isn't easy. However, each person in the group shares the common goal of working to save their livelihood. The following is a short video that was put together by Channel 9, recording a brief introduction to the Tomo Creek Cluster Group and how and why they're building their fence.
It's a first for the country, and for many of these graziers, it's also a last chance.
There's no future for us without a fence like this.
They're building what's called a cluster fence that will enclose 18 individual but massive grazing properties.
How unusual is it for graziers to get together and work together on the one project?
Yeah, it's a new thing, I think, but the fact that we've all got a common goal is probably what's brought us together.
They're doing it primarily because of these wild dogs that kill their livestock.
Oh, very serious. We're talking no lambing and no kids for the last couple of years.
We've been losing 900 ground sheep per year.
On Dundee Station, surrounding graziers gather. They're working together.
Very, very unusual. They're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 kilometres away from each other. They don't come together that often.
It's a huge project, more than 200 kilometres of fence to keep out the wild dogs and the kangaroos.
that your livelihood and their future depends on this fence?
Yeah, 100%.
Before each section of new fence is built, the old one has to come down, but they know they have no choice, even though it's costing more than $1 million. While the state government, through Southwest Natural Resource Management, is subsidising the project, each of these graziers is still spending thousands of their own money.
It is painstaking work, even with the post-hole digging machinery to help them. They're still only moving at a rate of about 1.5 kilometres of fence line per day. It means it's going to take them something like 7 or 8 months to complete this massive project.
Each completed section, another brick in their wall.
For us and our next generations, it's going to give us a future.
In southwest Queensland, Phil Willington, 9 News.
So that's the Tomo Creek Cluster Group. They're on some pretty rough country out there, and they're one of the groups that have actually completed their fence earlier than anybody else. So they're possibly coming in at under 12 months to get theirs done. So to understand the impact of the fences and some of the changes that are occurring as a result of this project, we're following a monitoring and evaluation plan that incorporates a range of measures that are conducted both inside and outside of the clusters. This data collection involves pasture monitoring using a land condition assessment to look at changes in pasture health. These assessments look at health factors such as dominant pasture species and their density, biomass, total ground cover, and evidence of erosion. These assessments are conducted on both the inside and the outside of the fence, and they can be compared over the coming years to determine changes. We're also conducting a passive tracking index to look at wild dog numbers. This isn't an estimate of dog numbers, but rather an index that tracks changes in a population. To do this, we sweep 1 metre wide sand plots at 1 kilometre intervals along a 50 to 60 kilometre transect, one on the inside and one on the outside of the cluster. The passive tracking index is obtained 3 times yearly, once in April, May to coincide with the mating season for dogs, August, September to coincide with peak macropod numbers, and again in November, as this is when the pups are leaving the den and are on the ground. This method of looking at wild dogs also gives us information on other animals in the area, and on the sand plots we will often pick up the tracks of birds, cats, foxes and kangaroos. We're using density estimates taken from spotlighting data to monitor macropod numbers. Similarly to the passive tracking index, this form of data collection does not offer information on population estimates, but rather a population density that can be compared over a number of years. These density estimates are taken by spotlighting from the back of a vehicle, travelling along 10 kilometre transects. All sightings are recorded and the information is uploaded to a software program called Distance. This program will provide density and abundance information, with the overall density representing kangaroos per square kilometre. These density estimates are collected 3 times yearly, following on from the passive tracking index. Early density estimates from the inside of just one of the clusters indicates that there are approximately 71 kangaroos per square kilometre. With a dry sheep equivalent of 0.7, this equates to roughly 49 sheep per square kilometre that land managers aren't able to run. Economic and productivity data is also being used to monitor the success of the project. Information on stocking rates and lambing rates is being collected from properties both inside and outside of the clusters, including data from before the fences were constructed. This will enable comparison as the project continues. While it's too early at this stage to have enough scientific data to support the cluster fencing project, we understand anecdotally that land managers are seeing positive changes. Reports from one cluster indicate that predation on wildlife may have been reduced, as there have been sightings of small native animals in the area that have not been seen for a significant length of time. Ground nesting birds have been able to raise chicks near one of the homesteads, and koalas were sighted during a recent survey. Other reports from a different cluster mention reduced numbers of kangaroos moving across the landscape and stripping paddocks bare. To maximise the outcomes of the project, there are a range of other tactics and technologies being used by the cluster groups. The first of these is motion sensing sirens, or dingo beepers, in the far corner. These are the same design as those used on the state wild dog barrier fence, and they're used at openings to the cluster, such as on roadways and grids. Next slide. These sirens are often accompanied by a flashing light and are activated when an animal attempts to enter the cluster. Pest animals such as wild dogs will often follow a track along a fence line and can gain access to a cluster at roadways. Motion cameras are another tool that are being used by land managers, not just within the clusters but also across the southwest region. These cameras are used to monitor the behavioural patterns of pest animals and are often placed near water points or other areas that these animals are likely to be. Cameras with newer technology are capable of sending an email or a text message to a mobile phone, giving land managers almost real-time information about the pest animals on their properties. Drones or unmanned aerial vehicles have recently been tested inside one of the cluster groups to assess the ability to locate pest animals from the air. These drones are equipped with thermal imaging cameras and they're able to detect heat signature differences for a wide range of species. The information from these drones can assist with targeted baiting efforts by determining areas of high density pest populations. Pest animal locations can also be mapped and real-time location footage can be sent to a hunting team on the ground. We've got some really good videos of this exact trial in one of the clusters that are available online, so if anyone wants any more information I can give you a link to that particular one. Next one. So to sum it all up, the sheep industry is declining and cattle are on the increase in this historically wool-producing region, a trend that can be partly blamed on predation by pest animals such as wild dogs and feral pigs, but also on a total grazing pressure that is outstripping what the land is capable of sustaining. The Collaborative Area Management Project aims to reduce predation on livestock and total grazing pressure through the use of exclusion fencing in conjunction with appropriate grazing management. We will know that the project has been successful when sheep are returning to the area, grazing pressure has been reduced and ground cover condition is increased, and when we can see the wide-reaching benefits to local communities and a positive impacts on biodiversity across these parts of southwest Queensland. Thank you. If anyone's got any more information, I'm happy to have a chat. Thank you.
Given the anecdotal evidence of the cams, what do you think is the likely uptake of other land managers to do it for themselves if there's no funding available?
It's expensive to do it individually. So this is why we're pushing that if people do it in groups, it's far more cost effective.
Yeah, but what I meant was other groups to do it on their own if they can't get funding to add to their own money to do the fencing.
A lot of people are doing it because there are economic returns as well that we're starting to see come out of the project. So there are already groups that are branching off from original ones. So where the wild dog barrier fence actually meets up with some of the big clusters, other land managers are then coming off that because they may already have sort of 30 to 50% of their fence built and are then coming up with their own clusters coming off that. So I think it will be adopted across a wider landscape. That's what I would hope anyway, because yeah, people are seeing economic returns as well as a reduction in dingo numbers and all the rest of it too. So, and it's actually increasing the worth of a property. So I recently got an email from a land manager who said that his property has just been valued and it came back at 30% higher since he joined up with the cluster group. Whether or not that can all be attributed to the exclusion fence, I don't know. It might be he had a different valuer and it may be the different seasons and things as well, but some of that at least has got to come back to what the cluster fence is offering.
You could turn that question on its head, Darren, and say the economic analysis can show that you could pay on an average season with an increase in lambing percentages, pay off the cost of that in 4 or 5 years. So why are the government paying for it?
And some people are...
That's a hard question.
The people who have done it individually, some of them are coming back and saying that the payback period has been within 2 years just by increased lambing rates.
Catherine, I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on some of the biodiversity benefits that you spoke about, and also interested, have there been any, because it's always tricky when you fence because it stops dingoes and roos. Are there any other animals that have been unintentionally altered in migration or any issues?
Native animals, not that I'm aware of, because the fence has holes in it sort of probably about that size, so a lot of your small native animals will actually be able to get through it. So you're looking at an increase in animal biodiversity because when you increase that ground cover and you take out the predation issue from dogs, you are going to get an increase in your native animals. But not just that, you also then, when you stop the grazing pressure being so high, you also reduce a lot of the weed introduction. So you're not having erosion, you're not having those bare areas that are being overtaken by weeds. So you're also seeing an increase in biodiversity of the native grasses and things as well in the area. So it's not just the animals, it's also the plants that are coming back in.
So that's just natural recruitment through lack of...
That's what we're assuming is going to happen. It hasn't been up and running for long enough to get the evidence, but this is what the land condition assessments are hoping to show.